Hi everyone, I just finished constructing this beautiful necklace. Basically it consists of an assemblage of parts that include circular watercolor paper forms with rice paper beads inserted inside. In the video I'll guide you step by step in how to make the necklace, but before we begin that, I'd like to take a closer look at the parts that compose it. Looking closely at the piece, you see that it consists of a series of repeated shapes, the circular form, and within each circular form is a rice paper bead that I handmade and painted with watercolor paint. The individual assemblages are attached with a bridge and link that I made out of 18-gauge sterling silver wire. The clasp is also handmade. It's a beautifully distinctive necklace, rich in color. Let's make it. Before we actually make the necklace, I'd like to review the tools that we're going to be using. We need a variety of pliers. Here we have our side or flush cutters, the round nose pliers, and a pair of chain link needle nose pliers. These three basic pliers are used to construct the bridge and links that tie everything together. See how it works? The uniform paper constructions are attached with the bridge and links. How do we create these circular forms? Well, one of the basic ways you can go about doing it is drawing it out on your paper and using an X-Acto knife to cut out the circular forms. But that would be extremely tedious and very time-consuming. And you wouldn't get the beautifully perfect round circles that I have here. What did I do? I purchased two circle paper punches of different sizes, a 1/2 inch and a 3/4 inch. I'll explain why the different sizes when we actually begin the construction process. This made the work go a lot faster than if I was to hand cut everything with my X-Acto knife. To do the cutting, I like to cut on these self-healing mats. What's nice about the mat is it also has ruler gradations on it, so it's a very useful mat for measuring dimensions of wire. And, of course, a ruler does come in handy. Materials. What type of materials do we need? One basic material is our glue, and I use Talus Jade 711. This is my favorite glue to use. Archival, and it's a wonderful, wonderfully strong glue. To construct the bridge and links, you're going to need wire. What I use in class for my demonstrations is nickel silver wire. Nickel silver wire contains no real elemental silver. It's an alloy composed of nickel, zinc, and copper. This happens to be 20 gauge, and for the project, I'll be using the 20 gauge nickel silver wire. When the individual unit forms are finished, you'll need to varnish them. I use Minwax polyacrylic. I put it in a squeeze bottle so it's easy to dispense. Notice my glue is also in a similar squeeze bottle. The pieces are made using the same paper construction method that you've seen me employ in the pendants and the earrings, and the paper earrings. The paper I like to use is Archer's 140-pound watercolor paper. Here's some pre-prepared paper that I will be using, meaning that it's been painted on with my watercolors. I let the watercolors flow. I splash the colors, throw a little salt in to create this wild effect over here. Many of my videos show me demonstrating the painting technique that I use to create this abstract type of image on watercolor paper. I don't plan to do that in this video because it does take a bit of time, and I'd rather keep the video under a half hour. And now, since I have so many videos out that demonstrate the technique, for example, my watercolor paper earrings have me demonstrating this technique. The Watercolor Paper Pendant has me demonstrating this technique. So I recommend you watch one of those videos if you want to see how to do this. The painted paper is what you see on the top. It's built up with layers of 140-pound watercolor paper that I'll punch out using the circle punch to create the basic shapes. See how I do it? But we'll talk about this a little later. To make the beads in the center, they're handmade rice paper beads. I use this beautiful, thin rice paper with filaments inside. Look at that. There is one final thing that I wear, and that is goggles. You want to protect your eyes when you're cutting the wire and working with the hand tools. A wire could go flying out and hit you in the face or the eye. So always wear your goggles. I'm about to begin the construction of the actual necklace. And to create the circular forms that you see here, which are composed of 140-pound cold-pressed watercolor paper. Nickel silver wire contains no real elemental silver. So I have my watercolor paper ready to go, and my hole punches. What did I say we were going to do? A 1/2 inch and 3/4 inch was used to make this size unit form. And instead of making an exact copy of this, I'm going to go a little larger. I'd like to see how it looks. I just happened to find this circle in a pile of punched out circles, and I think that would make a great unit form for a necklace. So I'll use my 3/4 inch punch and a 1 inch punch. Now, why do I use 2 paper punches? Here's what we do. The first thing in preparing a paper is to punch out a series of the smaller or the inner part of the circle. The first hole is created. It always has to be the smaller hole. Approaching it that way allows you to center the larger punch within or over the smaller hole. So you have a nice circular form. See? Beautiful. Now what I'll do is first I'll punch out a series of my smaller circles. I don't punch one, put it down, take the tool, punch another. It wastes time. I'd rather cut out a bunch of smaller circles. I'm going to save these. These look like they can be useful down the road. That's not bad. Okay. Well, you get the idea. What do we need here? A total of 5 to make the first part of the circle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Good. 1. I see some laying around. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Excellent. So I can get 3 going. Let's do that. First thing I need to do is glue up a bunch of these circles. For the gluing process, I have a container with some clean water for cleaning my brush. The Jade 7-Eleven in a plastic squeeze bottle dispenser. Get the water out of my way so I don't spill it all over the place. When I'm gluing shapes like this together, I like to use some kind of a tool. In this case, I'll use a simple little toothpick to hold the piece from moving as I glue it. Put on a bead of glue. Spread it with my brush. There we go. That's wonderful. Just press it a little bit. See what I do? That assures me that I'm getting 100% contact. You don't want any lifting of the paper to occur, any separation to occur. That's why this is important to do. So we have one. We have a lot more to go. Three layers thick. And press into it. Good. Put that on the side. You want to make certain that they all line up nicely and you don't have them zigzagging all over the place. This could be better, but it's okay. So I have three. So here's what we do next. I continue to cut out circles. As you can see, I have a lot more that I'm going to use actually. And I glued layers of three together. These will be the center layers that will be sandwiched between a top and bottom layer of painted paper. And I also painted the sides, as you can see. And that's the rice paper bead. Now I have to establish the channel that's going to allow the bridging link to pass through. How do I do that? That's an inch. And that's the ½ inch. So now I'll take my ruler, position it in the middle at the ½ inch mark, and draw a line down the middle on each one. So why did I go through all that trouble of marking the middle? Because now we have to cut these in half. Cut to either side of the line. If you had a thicker line, that would be a better example. You want to create a little space. When you glue everything up, you want to have an opening in the middle of these pieces. But I just cut to either side of the line. Dull blade. Never work with a dull blade. Always make sure you have a sharp blade in your X-Acto knife, and be careful. I don't use scissors because scissors would bend the paper or disfigure it. I want the paper to lay nice and flat. This might be helpful. Instead of cutting the circles in half using your X-Acto knife, it might be simpler to just mark them. Then, instead of cutting it with the X-Acto knife, simply take your side cutters. This is a cheap pair of side cutters. And snip. See how easy that is? This is how I do it. We're ready to go. Having cut the centers out of three of them, now I'm prepared to complete the basic shape. And I complete it by gluing a solid piece to the top and the bottom. In other words, all I'm doing at this stage is making a sandwich. I'll glue that there, line it up with the outer circumference, and I'll glue that there, lining it up with the outer circumference. Want to make sure I have enough glue. Now, I take a half, position it in place, and the other half. Now, you could scrape out actually a little glue in there if you want to. I'm going to apply glue to the top layer. I'm being more or less careful not to flood that opening. Take another piece, a solid piece, and sandwich it. Okay. It's important to make sure there's no lifting of the paper. You see the channel that's built into it. Very good. Let's do it again. This is a multi-step process. After the paper has all been glued together, you have some sanding to do. Good. Now I just place this on the side to dry. Three down, 15 to go. There are 3 layers of watercolor paper that have been cut, sandwiched between 2 uncut layers. On top of this now, to complete the basic circular unit form, I'm going to glue painted watercolor paper. And then I sand it, refine the edge, paint the edge. And the beauty of this project is you have the opportunity to use a lot of the scraps that you may have accumulated. But scraps, I never throw anything away. I never consider anything garbage. I consider everything raw material to be used at a later date. What do we do next? Now, I simply continue to assemble the parts. I will take my Jade 711. Position a top painted layer. Flip it over. Dispense some glue. Butter it up. Make sure it's completely coated. And it is. Then position another top layer. That's looking nice. I like these. Simple circular forms assembled into a beautiful necklace. It's rough around the edges right now. All that will be sanded, refined, and painted, and then varnished. Now, I'll shut off the camera and continue to finish off the remainders. And I have quite a few. See you in a bit. I've glued watercolor paper to the outer sides of all the circular forms that I had created, and I've allowed it to dry overnight. With the additional painted paper glued to each piece, each unit form now is 7 layers thick. What's left to do? Well, we have to clean them up. If you look closely, you'll see they're very irregular, uneven. It's not a lot of work, but they need to be sanded. A nice solution for cleaning up the inside of the pieces of the circle is to simply take a piece of sandpaper. This was about a 2-inch length of sandpaper, and I wrapped it around a 1/4-inch diameter piece of dowel. And now I can very easily then I take a flat piece of paper and I sand the edge to a reasonable finish. Just be certain when you do that you don't emphasize one area and develop a flat spot. That would not look good. You want to maintain the roundness. Also at the edges, I always advise my students to push against it like this. Don't go back and forth. Maybe in the beginning you can, but you're going to get a burr on it, a little lip. So it's good to sand into the piece, like you see me doing here. I'm going to clean these up. See you later. They cleaned up nicely. And there's just one other thing I want to point out in regard to the cleanup process. After you sand, take a needle file, if you have one, it's convex on one side and flat on the other. With the convex side, I put it into my piece, and along the edge, any fuzziness that resulted from the sanding, the file will cut it right off. The flat side, I go along the outer edge. It cuts off any of that fuzziness. What remains to be done now is the sides and the inner part need to be painted. Here's how I like to solve the painting problem. You have to hold on to the piece, and I find since we have the hole already inserted, a very easy way to hold on to the piece is simply to stick a toothpick in there. Now I can paint the edges and not worry about messing it up with my fingers. I usually like to dampen the edge first. This makes it easier to flow the watercolor onto the paper. Now I'll use some of my standard colors, a little cobalt blue, a little Winsor or Phthalocyanine blue, alizarin crimson, and some magenta. Now, with the edge dampened, I flow in my watercolor. And I allow the colors to blend naturally. I don't attempt to mix them up. After I apply them, I just let them flow. That's it. Leave it alone. Forget about it until it's dry. The next thing I need to do is apply the varnish, and that's going to really enhance the look of the color. Apply the varnish to the entire surface. I spent a bit of time preparing the rest of the circles. This is a little thing I rigged to support them while varnishing and drying. I also made the rice paper beads that will be inserted in the centers of the circles. If you'd like to learn how to make rice paper beads, please watch my video on how to make rice paper beads. Let's put the parts together. We have a completed assemblage. Let's do another one and interconnect the two. Here's how I like to do it. I'm going to begin making my bridge and link by bending out the wire at a 45-degree angle. Also notice I've marked my pliers. I want to be able to duplicate that size in every bridge and link that I make. So having bent the wire out at a 45-degree angle, I bend it up and around like so. Having created that simple loop, I now hold the loop firm with my chain link pliers and take a second pair of pliers and wrap the wire once, twice around the stem that goes down. Then cut off the excess. It's a little sloppy looking right now. There are two things that I do to finish that off. First thing I do is squeeze it down with my pliers. The second thing I'll do is use my chain link pliers to squeeze down that little piece of wire that always seems to be sticking up after you cut the wire. I don't want any edge sticking up like that. It's not a good look, and it's not functional. It'll stick onto things. Craftsmanship has to be good, and you have to pay attention to these kind of details. Okay, so now what do? I'm going to insert it in there. No need to attach the two yet. And I'll show you why. We'll insert it in there. Grab one of our finished rice paper beads. Insert the bead. Pull it through. To complete this assemblage, what has to be done is this. You place your wire in the jaws of the plier, leaving about, I don't know, that looks a little more than 1/8 of an inch between the plier and the piece. That gives you enough space to bend the wire at a 45-degree angle. Pull the wire up and around to make that loop. Before you complete the coil around the stem, insert the open end, into the one you just constructed. Like that. Having done that, I'll use my chain link pliers to hold everything in place. With a second pair of pliers, I form that coil. And I never extend the coil more than 2 times around. Trim off the excess. And like you saw me do up here, flatten that little edge that sticks up. Okay. And I like to remove any of the kinks that develop in the piece. We seem to be on our way. As you can see, I've basically finished the piece. I attached the rice paper beads to the circular forms. And it's long enough. And now it's time to finish it off with its clasp. And I like to construct this toggle clasp. Here's what I do. I cut myself a 1-inch wide length of rice paper. And I'm never really too concerned about the overall length. It's 5 inches long. I position the toothpick at the edge of the rice paper, and I've put a little bead of glue along the edge. Let's turn it up. I don't have to add glue as we go. The reason being, when I saturate it with the varnish will transform this piece of paper into something that resembles plastic. I always end my turning process on a paper towel to absorb any of the excess glue. The next step in finishing up the rod part of the toggle clasp is to paint it up with watercolor. But before I actually put paint on the paper rod that I've constructed, I dampen it with water, with clean water. The reason why I do that is I intend the paint to immediately be absorbed by the paper and create nice diffused color flows. Oh, that's nice. You see the gold? That is a little micaceous pigment that I added to it. I'll show you what it is in a moment. Also, I think you're getting a good glimpse of why I like the rice paper. It has a beautiful opalescent look to it. I promised I'd tell you about the micaceous pigment that I add to my watercolor. This is it. Yeah, let's take a closer look. It's powdery. I suggest you wear a dust mask if you use it. I dab a little on my paintbrush and I blend it in with my watercolor that I'm preparing. for the rice paper and circular forms. Yeah. Okay. We're going to let it dry. Because rice paper is extremely absorbent, when I apply dilute varnish to the surface, it soaks right into the paper, permeates the paper. What I need to do now is put it aside. And we'll let it dry. When the camera was off, I was also preparing another one, getting it ready to go. And I've drilled a hole in this one. Let's finish it up. I also made this little eye loop to attach the circular form to the necklace. And here's what we do. By the way, this is made out of 20 gauge nickel silver wire, the same nickel silver wire that I use for the bridging links. I'll take my wooden bead and I'm going to need to glue it in place. I'm using crazy glue to attach the wire to the wooden bead. It's really sucking in there. To attach the rod end with a piece of nylon jewelry cord, like you see here. And the trick is to get the jewelry cord through the bead and the rod. I'll show you how I do that. First, let's place our cord into the eye of the bridging link. Then, and this works like a charm, I get a piece of lightweight, this is a 6-pound test, fishing line. I tie the fishing line around the end of the jewelry cord, and I pull it really tight. I want that to lock in. And I do it again. I use a double knot. Okay. Well, first we have to pull it through our toggle component. Now I insert the fishing line and pull it through. And I'll thread it through my bead. Same on the other side. I was able to pull the second length of cord through nicely. So it's finished. It's attached and glued in place. To glue it to the bead, I used crazy glue. I find it very effective because of the capillary action. It sucks right in and it's permanent. That's not coming out. Good. I hope you give this project a try and enjoy making it as much as I did. Thanks for watching.